digital transformation equals loads of layoffs.
Yeah. It's almost like a euphemism, isn't it? Digital transformation, I think.
We're going to digitally transform you from having a job
really
to being on the dole. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I'm joined this week by Iain from Light Reading and by Wei from Telecoms.com Intelligence. Hello. Hi. What we can talk about this week, so it's been a little while. We had guest Paul in last time, and we're not going to do another one for a little while because Pierre's going off for reasons I won't be so indiscreet as to talk about. Better make it good, you two, no pressure.
Okay.
What we can talk about, both Iain and I today wrote about a sort of soap opera going on at the Dutch operator KPN, who just recruited a new CEO, but that's all going Pete Tong. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about, Iain, you went to an event, keep forgetting the name, 5G Core Fest.
Summit.
There we go.
Yeah, it could be Fest.
5G Core Fest. Everything's Fest as far as events go.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the senior management of Informa would share my description of events, but there we go. Good thing they never watch or listen to this. 5G Core Skive. 5G Core spend the afternoon in the pub after you sat through a couple of keynotes. Anyway, and so on. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I may mention an event I went to as well. And then we're going to finish off, because it's been far too long, with a little talk about Huawei and just more who's allowing Huawei and who isn't. Okay. So to head off, KPN. I'll give a little summary.
Just a reminder.
Oh, sorry, Pierre. Yep. Just a reminder: if you're watching this on YouTube or on the site or on Facebook, you can listen to it on iTunes or SoundCloud or countless other podcasting platforms. Okay. So I'll head off in, and then I'll get you to put your 10 cents worth in, and where you can just say, "What the hell are you guys talking about?" So Dominique Leroy, or is it
Leroy?
Leroy would be.
Oh, I just call her Leroy.
Yeah, I call her Leroy.
I
tried to.
I don't know. Could be wrong.
I tried to go one bit closer.
It's doesn't Leroy mean king?
Way, just
the French first name. So
just because he knows how to order a croissant, he thinks he can tell me how to pronounce stuff.
No.
Yeah.
It's the king.
Not the king anymore.
Dominique the king.
Is it spelled with a Y or an I?
R-O-Y.
It's a Y.
Yeah. Why aren't we asking Pierre how we pronounce it? Although she is presumably Belgian or Dutch, I don't know.
She's Belgian, I think.
Yeah, Belgian.
Because I had to check for my Frog Marched headline just to make sure she wasn't actually French.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't have had a problem with that kind of low-lying xenophobia, but Pierre could tell you that. Yes, in fact, she had been French. I would have said that's a brilliant headline.
You'd have encouraged it.
But anyway, it wasn't, so there's an opportunity missed there. So she was CEO of Proximus, which used to be
Belgacom,
there we are, which is a Belgian operator.
It's like BT over there.
There we go, the sort of former state monopoly, presumably. And then she got poached by KPN, which is basically the equivalent in Holland, isn't it?
Yep.
To be their CEO, and that was all groovy, and she went, okay, I'm going from one Benelux to another. And she was going to leave by December.
By today, I think. No?
Originally it was December.
Okay. Yeah.
And then everybody kicked up a fuss about that.
I'll let you lead into that. But basically, long story short, there's some extra stuff which Iain covered, which I didn't, so I'll let you talk about it. But long and short of it is, 1st of August, she flogged a bunch of her shares. And then a month later, she's announcing a resignation.
Yeah.
People going, hold on a sec. You know, obviously a CEO announces resignation normally has some kind of effect on the share price. So then there's suspicion of insider trading. She made a sort of public announcement going, no, it's just a coincidence. But the Belgian authorities are like, well, we'll be the judge of that, young lady.
Yep.
And then KPN's just gone, no, this is just too dodgy. We're having none of this. And they've just gone, no, she's not CEO anymore. See you later. Their last thing was like, yeah, we wish her all the best.
We wish her all the best. I love that.
That was just her way of going, just don't bother ever coming near us again. So that's just, it's interesting, obviously, because these are telcos, but it's also interesting because it's sort of CEO shenanigans. Why don't you sort of fill us in on some of the bits I've been alluding to?
I mean, well, the announcement this morning I was a bit surprised about at first, and then I thought maybe it isn't surprising because I guess if she's under investigation, it could lead to criminal charges. They're not going to want to have anything to do with her, so they had to do what they did, really. But I think on that front, she's either done something wrong or she's been incredibly naive to think that selling shares and then joining a company a month later isn't going to prompt some kind of investigation. So it's either she's done something bad or she's just been quite incompetent in a way.
Well, and her excuse was that there's very little narrow windows of opportunity that CEO gets to flog their stuff.
But I think also
that just happened to be one
look back
of them.
at her sort of record of share selling at Proximus, she hasn't really ever sort of sold anything.
Right.
I mean, the amount she made is not staggering, but it's a handy little
$100
amount.
grand,
I think it's about 250 grand or something like that.
Better than a kick in the teeth.
Yeah, that come in handy for me. And
yeah.
She's had a pretty dodgy sort of few months really, because she, she handed in her resignation and was supposed to stay until December and leave. And then there were widespread reports from the kind of Belgian press of staff going on strike and protesting. And this is all related to, she's trying to push through a kind of digital transformation program, as they call it, which usually entails quite a lot of layoffs. And I think she'd warned of possibility of about 2,000 job cuts at the start of the year, which is quite a lot for a company that size, and they have about 13,000 employees in total.
Okay.
So this is over a 3-year period. It's a lot of people
like
coming out. And also there's going to be negotiations over wages, so similar things.
And why are they doing such big job cuts?
Well, I guess it's linked to a lot of the stuff that other operators are seeing in Europe as well. Shift to digital sales. You don't need people in stores as much selling things. There's some kind of impact in other areas as well to do with the move towards automation and things like that.
Right.
So, and they're just not seeing. I mean, they're kind of under a lot of the pressure that you see other operators under in Europe. They're not really seeing growth in sales at the moment. It's a long-running story of them neading to kind of boost margins in any way they can.
Yeah, which all too often means cutting overheads rather than increasing revenues.
And the reason staff have kind of gone on sort of been protesting is because they kind of felt that her sort of hanging around for a few months as CEO wasn't ideal.
Duck.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not wasn't really good to have somebody sort of, it's a kind of fairly crucial time for negotiations and restructuring, and they didn't want that to happen.
And they figured she wouldn't really care one way or the other.
As quickly as possible. So then the company ended up bringing forward her departure date. I think she went a couple of weeks ago.
20th,
and now this is kind of blown up. So she's now she's left a previous job. She hasn't got any job to go to, and she's under investigation by Belgian authorities.
It's not been a great month.
So it's been a pretty bad sort of.
It's not been a great month. So I hope that $250,000. She's drowning her sorrows there.
Needs to go a long way.
And the Proximus announcement about her leaving early, it was something about to restore serenity to the company or something like that. Yeah. That was. I mean, I don't know if some of this gets lost in translation, but there's some funny uses of language.
Yeah.
And obviously they're alluding to, there was outright picketing and general kicking off going on, wasn't there?
Yeah. And it's all the kind of investigations are all sort of confirmed now, and I think there's a lot of stuff in the actual Belgian press, but Proximus eventually sort of got in touch with me and then said that her home itself's been raided, as well as her office to the Proximus building. So
did she sell all her shares? Or just
No, she sold some, and the amount was. It was about 250,000 is what she made from the share
presumably
sale.
she has like 2 million more or something like that.
We have no idea.
I really don't
We can
know,
only speculate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could look up the full details.
I mean, but for a fact that she didn't flog all that she has.
I don't know for a fact she didn't flog all she has, but
we assume she had more than $250,000 worth.
She sold about $250,000 worth. Yeah,
and so we're just guessing that only represents some of what she had. Either way, it's sort of by the by. The weird thing, I'll ask you, just as you haven't written the story, but see what you think. But my feeling is, she admitted in her statement. So she published a statement on the Proximus website, going, "Look, I can see why this looks a bit dodgy now, in hindsight." Well done.
It's funny that she didn't work that out before.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? She's going, "Well, no one was more surprised than me how it came over." But she admits in that statement that she'd been having job interviews with KPN already. So it's not like at that moment she was totally cool with the whole job and nothing was further from her mind than leaving. She'd been having job interviews and she admitted that. Presumably she had to, because if she hadn't, then KPN would have gone, "Look, man,
and presumably KPN, and Proximus, people are going to get pulled into these investigations and asked to talk about what was going on. What sort of conversations were you having with her? Because if she went to Proximus in May and said, "I'm not very happy here, I'm thinking of moving on," it's not working out the way I thought, then that's bad,
Well, reading between the lines, I think that might have been something like that, because there was some kind of renegotiation of her contract underway.
Right.
And now let's guess here, I stress this is speculation, that one of the things she used to negotiate with, she was like, pay up or I'm off to KPN.
Yeah.
And they went, nah, you're bluffing. And she went, ha, I'm off. I mean, either way, all this stuff is all there hanging in the air. I mean, I don't know what you think from what we've said. I don't know if you got around to reading the story, Wei.
Yeah.
As ever, you've been kind of super sub today, haven't you?
Yeah.
We never give you any notice.
No, that's all right. I can't play
but,
the last 10 minutes.
How does it come over to you? Does it look like? Do you think it's plausible that anyone could have been in that situation? Does it look dodgy?
Yeah. Well, it does, with some hindsight. But as you said, there is only very limited windows that the senior executives can sell their shares. So it's between two reports, basically.
Yeah.
So you and maybe even, I think, a couple of weeks before the next report
between
coming
quarterlies.
Out. Between quarterlies,
yeah.
So after the first quarterlies come out, and then a couple of weeks before the next quarterlies. So there is a limited window that senior executives can sell their shares. So yeah, understandable. She probably captured that window. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, the negotiation must have already gone to pretty advanced stage, where she's confident enough that she will get the job.
Yeah. Because it's such a short amount of time after that she's she's quit.
I mean, it's a month after, just over a month after she flogged them, that they announced she was leaving.
Yeah.
So there's no way she suddenly woke up at one point in that intervening month from being really happy with the job to going, nah, I'm off.
No, it can't be. I mean,
these processes to find CEOs, I'm guessing, take a lot longer than finding some plod like me as well. It's like...
Even I had a couple of interviews.
And that takes long enough. So you think about finding a boss for a company, it's usually... I mean, BT took months and months, didn't they, to find a replacement for Patterson before they eventually got Janssen. So...
It not be often. I mean, half a year is pretty normal.
Yeah.
You find someone that can do the handover in a pretty smooth way. So yeah, I think that's probably a bad judgment on her side.
What do you think she should have done though?
Well, I was actually going to lead to that. Thanks for that.
Segue.
Yeah. But in your previous habit of just finishing my sentences for me.
Either not sold shares or not change jobs.
Well, quite. That's what I was going to say.
You can either sell shares and stay there for a while and then move on, or you can...
Or wait till after you've handed in your notice. If you knew there was a possibility. If you knew there was a possibility you're leaving.
Later in the year.
Then you sit on it. Because once she's left, I mean, there might be some kind of sort of vesting period or something like that.
What was the movement on the stock?
It wasn't a lot, but it's still enough for it to be. It's not even if it moves. It's the knowledge that because those kinds of movements do tend to make the stock go down and the CEO.
Yeah, in hindsight, it didn't move that much.
It didn't move that much.
I don't know what that says about the market's view of her CEO-ship.
I'm not sure how much stocks do move when telco CEOs
I actually read somewhere it went down a couple of %.
Yeah.
So
in that case, I know, but I'm just generally what's the sort of when a CEO moves on from a service provider that has a sort of middling performance, which most of them do these days, they're sort of growing at 0.5% each year or something. Then what's the general impact on the share price? It's not like Steve Jobs if he quit Apple when he was around or something. I suspect it would have gone.
No, it's a good point. I mean, obviously, I know you're not saying that it makes any material difference, but obviously, what is undeniable is that it's a piece of news that will materially affect the stock, and that is what sort of insider trading people.
The worst thing is when you join and the stock goes down.
Yeah.
So didn't that happen when Janssen joined or something?
Sometimes that happens. That's a bit of a bad first day, isn't it? Especially when it's a public company and your sole job is to make the stock go up, and your mere appearance sends it in the opposite direction. So I think that's clear. You just wait till after. I mean, that's the really unambiguous part about it.
Yeah.
If you're going to be completely squeaky clean, you just wait for the whole process to play out. Wait till you've actually left, then you can flog as much as you want. Presumably, there might be some sort of tie-in.
It's doing one or the other. It's the two of them together in a short space of time. That's the problem.
If you're leaving the company and you're not being fired, you can actually carry your shares with you.
Yeah.
So that's what.
Well, they're yours.
And she might still. I don't know. As we say, I don't actually know how much she still has.
But the only mitigation there is you sometimes get a sort of lock-in period where you can't flog them after a little while.
Yeah.
But either way, this is a matter of making that decision is just a matter of whether you gain or lose a few grand. And I would have thought, certainly in hindsight, I bet she wishes she hadn't done it. But for the sake of a few grand. So what materially happened, if it went down 2%, off the top of my head, that means that she she would have lost $5,000.
Which is nothing, is it?
Yeah.
For someone in that position making that amount of money. So, but which also makes you think maybe it was just a stupid,
It's a bit of a schoolboy error, isn't it?
Yeah,
schoolgirl error.
The thing is, what happens to her if the Belgian authorities say, you are sort of did something wrong? Then, I don't know what the penalties are for this kind of thing.
You can get put away for that.
You can get put away. Yeah.
Although, as we know, it's white collar crime. They normally find some way of helping each other out.
Her prospects for kind of moving. I mean, I think I wrote in my story, like, you see these guys at telcos sort of pop up everywhere else, don't they? Like the guy who's just left Proximus is now head of Sky Italia.
Yeah.
And someone, Vestberg leaves Ericsson and goes over. And that's not a telco,
there's the top table merry-go-round.
She's probably gone from the scene.
A table we'll
now,
never be anywhere near. We wouldn't even get the scraps off it.
Yeah, but Iain, as you say in your piece, it's a bit like football managers changing from one club to another.
Yeah.
But what interested me the most of the whole, apparently the whole drama was pretty funny, but what interested me the most was the way that she was planning to lay off so many people under the banner of digital transformation, as you just said. And we discussed before we came on the show that probably the first most tangible result of digital transformation is job loss nowadays. So how should both telcos and the, for example, the consultancy companies position digital transformation in a more positive way? That's probably more important for the industry.
I guess that kind of leads us on. We've pretty much explored that. Digital transformation, I gather, was one of the themes at this 5G Core Fest.
It was, yeah.
So why don't you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, the 5G core is like such a big issue at the moment because we've seen the sort of radio networks being rolled out, and the next stage is actually getting in this sort of next generation, more cloud native, more software based core technology that allows them to do all these whizzy new things in the future, hopefully.
Yeah.
And it's a massive deal. There's a lot of technology that you can go and talk about and go around in circles, and we'll never fully understand it.
What the core is to look at. If I saw one, I wouldn't go, that's a core.
I think it's all software now, isn't it? It's all software systems, but it's been hosted in the past in a few kind of big data centers.
But it's like the core of the internet.
Well, it's the core of their systems, isn't it? It's the core of their network systems, but you would interconnect with the internet on that. So but it's one of the things, and we talk about this a lot in the podcast, I think, probably have done over the last couple of years, is the need for getting new people into telcos who can actually use those technologies.
The software-y, virtualized.
Yeah, exactly. And it was one of the interesting things I thought that came out at the 5G Core event, because it's still obviously a huge deal for them trying to get this, trying to get either staff retrained to be able to work with software technologies. And you put it like really well, I thought, just before we came in, when you were saying like in the old days, people on the technical side used to sort of work on soldering boxes together, and now they're expected to be coders, and they don't have those kinds of people in-house, obviously.
And we often say that, well, automation will create new jobs, and that's true, but it's not the jobs for the same people.
Well, exactly.
Because those people in their late 40s, early 50s, they've been trained to, for example, deal with moving boxes, and suddenly they have to be coders.
We're that age, we can't learn new
well, true. So, I mean, automation... it got to be a double-edged sword.
No, and you're completely right about that sort of cliche about, people go, well, Industrial Revolution, that far from putting people out of work, created new jobs. Yes, over the fullness of time. Yeah. But not for the...
looking at the full population.
Not for the bloke who was, who's using a spinning jenny or whatever. Yeah. Probably the wrong era, but, you know what I meant.
Yeah. But I think the problem for the telcos is that it's not as though the time's on their side. They've been talking about this and this came up a few times at the event in Madrid, this sort of recognition that virtualization, which ties in a lot with this 5G core story, because everything's heavily virtualized, everything's expected to be
software
driven and engineered that way.
And cloud native.
Cloud native is now the next kind of thing after virtualization. But there's this recognition that virtualization has been like a colossal, I say colossal failure, maybe I'm exaggerating, but everybody's saying it just hasn't worked out the way they expected it to.
But they've been saying that for a bit. I mean, we're not talking about NFV so much now, but I remember
Well,
years ago.
NFV is only 7 years old, and it's basically
only 7 years.
Only 7 years. Okay, so it's 7 years is quite a long time, and it's just not done what it was supposed to do. And
there's been scepticism for a while.
There's been scepticism for a while. It's been getting worse, and now the telcos are kind of really sort of. I had Deutsche Telekom at the show, basically sort of admitting problems on the PanNet project that they've been trying to do, which is this idea of building one kind of cloud-based network for all of its European markets and getting rid of a lot of the legacy platforms that cater to
which
individual
is a great
countries.
idea on PowerPoint.
And it's just not. And the guys basically said, "Yeah, we made mistakes. It hasn't worked. We've got to go about things in a different way." And unless they can obviously get the staff in who can do this sort of thing or retrain staff, and it's not just on the core as well. It's also more sort of area that's easy to understand, I guess, is basically just having people who can, work with chatbots on a customer services side and, kind of getting the customer services organisation redesigned in that way. Unless they can do this fairly quickly, they're going to be in big trouble because the web companies, everybody says they're a threat. They're not slowing down, and they can't have another 7 years of trying to get cloud native technology living up to its promise, and then in
so.
In
but you talk about the big sort of IT and the internet companies. What are they going to do? Do you think they might create sort of cores themselves and then make and do a better job, and then effectively the operators have got to sort
because
of.
Isn't Amazon's already? You can get certain telecom services, certainly in the enterprise sector, from Amazon Web Services. Now they're increasingly moving into that area.
You get a branch of AWS that's telecoms.
Yeah, I think
specific.
the worry for the telcos, and this has been a worry for a long time, but unless they kind of get this sort of thing right and get their organisation sorted out, the worry for the telcos is that they will just end up being, it's a horrible expression that's been overused, but a dumb pipe.
Yeah.
They are just
commoditized.
Last mile companies, and then you get into issues like, then it becomes a regulatory issue almost to do with the structure of the market. How many of those do you actually need? Is it worth spending all this money to have? No one would spend money having 5 railway tracks running parallel to each other.
No.
So,
more's the pity. They might not be so rubbish.
I suppose, but. That's.
But that's sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just following up on what Ian was just saying. The web scale companies like Amazon, they've been very active in sort of trialing out on the edge, so setting up their almost private cellular networks, and they probably will join auctioning for frequencies. And I had a chat with a big European operator representatives at the recent Edge event. What is it called? Edge Computing Fest?
Oh, that one was
Edge Fest.
Edge
Fest, yes. Another fest. Anyway, so his view is, you wrote about it, so should telcos own the edge, or could they?
It's a similar concept. It's the same concept.
It's very related.
Core, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he said their biggest worry is that on the edge, then it suddenly became the territory of the web scale companies.
Yeah.
That will be the biggest nightmare for the telcos, because their advantage is they're distributed. So they're much more to the edge than the web scale companies. And certainly if the web scale companies become so powerful on the edge as well, then that will be a big nightmare for the telcos.
No, so I agree that they're in a stronger sort of incumbent position to dominate the edge should they choose to. They got less sort of competency the further into the core you get. But we were just chatting about it beforehand. This is a thing that has come up. It's a bit of a cliche that, bright young techie things would rather go and join an internet company and operate, which I've no doubt is true. But having said that, if they offer a 21-year-old 50, 100 grand, they'll come along, won't they?
Yeah, but I think that's the other issue for them is there's a cost side to hiring people like that.
Well, there is
and
there is
I
a
talk
limit.
to people, even in maybe more so actually. I remember talking to, I think it was Excel Axiata in Nice when we were there for the TM Forum event about digitalisation and getting people like data scientists into the company. And the guy who I spoke to, whose name I can't remember, the executive who was sort of in charge of all of that, was saying, there's a lot of competition for a very small number of people.
Yeah.
And it's from companies it's kind of from banks as well. They want to hire those kinds of people, and as well as the web companies.
And they're just sort of super code.
And the data scientists are sort of in short supply.
Even my kids seem to be into coding. That's missing a trick there.
It's not coding. It's data.
That's data analysis.
Scientists. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because, that was a big
So mathsy
difference.
types.
A big difference actually, because there was a survey done on the UK business, and the majority of the companies said they've changed their recruiting focus recently. Because a couple of years ago, the focus was on web developing. So everyone was trying to develop their own app.
Yeah.
One bank or service providers or whatever, and then just recently the focus has been shifted to data analysis. Yeah. And then machine learning and stuff like that. Okay. So it's a big shift, and as you said, there is a big competition between the internet companies, the service providers, and the industries. So the banks and stuff. So.
Well, there's one other thing actually. Referring to the event I went to, so I went all the way over to San Diego in California for a Qualcomm event. Wasn't much sort of hard news coming through because it's mainly a sort of analyst update type of thing. But one common thread I heard from a few speakers, they talked a lot. This was 5G/IoT, this event, and they talked a lot about private networks in like smart factories.
Yeah.
That seems to be a bit of a buzzwordy thing at the moment. So you have a wireless network, but it's private and it's just confined to this one industrial area, be it a factory or a campus or whatever. And this is facilitated by 5G in lots of different ways. Firstly, you've got things like network slicing, where you can have the owner of a broader network set aside a bit of that network just for you, and then with that comes certain elevated service level guarantees of
and the cores needed for this. This is where
there we go. You can't do network slicing without all this.
This is why you need the 5G core, because it has all that sort of functionality to allow you to do these sorts of new whizzy services.
Yeah, so pretty much all of the stuff, apart from the enhanced mobile broadband, which we've got already, and I did get one demo from a Qualcomm guy. Granted, it was in their HQ, so it's under sort of optimal circumstances, but he did a speed test on his phone, went up to about 1.8 gig.
Right.
Damn.
It's pretty good.
And then when we tried to replicate it to film, it was only 300
How long
meg.
would that take to download the whole series of Game of Thrones?
Well,
that's always the one that people use, isn't it?
It's just like areas of land used to either be football fields or Waleses. Units of data are sort of box sets.
Game of Thrones
or
box sets.
Something like that. Yeah. So yes, you can do it 1 second. Gone are those nightmare days of having to wait around before we could download an entire box set.
I like I don't know if you saw Eurobytes with Paul Rainford's comment about, he used that and the Game of Thrones analogy, but it's something like all other historical fantasy nonsense with the occasional rude bit.
That is more or less it. And I lament the rude bits got fewer and further between as it went on.
The last series had none at all, really.
Zero rude bits. So yes, I think, whether we're talking about the edge or the core or this private network stuff, it all depends on what you're talking about there with having these whizzy coders and data analysts and all that sort of thing. And I take your point totally that telcos, for whatever reason, are struggling to recruit and retain them. And they might not even. The problem is they have to sort of reinvent the way they do things so much. They might not even know how best to use them, even if they did bribe them to go there instead of Google or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, where do you start? So this is the real conundrum. This comes back to the sort of DevOps culture side of things as well. Where do they start? I still don't I don't see how it could be beyond them. They've got plenty of smart people there. They're not all just sort of telecoms dinosaurs.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, though, comparing the audience at these telecom events, isn't it? With, not that I go to web developer conferences very often, but I imagine the average age difference is pretty stark. It's probably about 20 or 30 years or something. There's a lot of grey-haired people at the event in Madrid. It was a good turnout. It was like 350 attendees, I think, for an event that was always supposed to be quite small. So it's obviously an area that people are interested in.
It's obvious in our panel as well, because the surveys we conduct, and we ask people how much experience in telecom you have, and quite a few of them choose more than 20 years.
Yeah.
So they've been lifelong.
No, there are plenty of lifers, I'm sure. There's plenty of lifers at the vendors as well.
Yeah.
Whenever you see some little reshuffle at the top of Ericsson or Nokia, it's normally some Nordic type who's been there forever. Yeah. So
it looks like the last Nordic type who was doing the same job.
Exactly. Yeah, and yes. So I suppose there is that inertia problem, and there is that changing of the guard problem.
The other thing was on, not on that kind of web companies coming along and challenge them, just on the basic, trying to get their costs down. So one of the promises of virtualization and introducing this stuff into the core is that you've got a much lower cost base. You're able to operate more efficient networks, basically, and get the things like the cost per bit down and everything. And that's, people are obviously quite worried about this because you look at the volume of traffic and it's really kind of going up at ridiculous levels now with advanced 4G services and 5G.
And streaming video all over the place.
And yet the revenues are just like this. So, we talked about...
so you've got to reduce the cost
per
per
reduce
gigabyte,
the cost per
otherwise
bit.
you're losing money.
It's not that in itself wouldn't necessarily boost your profits.
You just got to do that
but
to
you've
stay
got to do
alive.
it just to stay alive, essentially. So...
Yeah, and so going full circle, that comes back to what these Proximus people were kicking off about.
Yeah.
Wasn't just a lack of steak frite or obscenely strong beer. It was the fact that digital transformation equals loads of layoffs.
Yeah. It's almost like a euphemism, isn't it? Digital transformation, I think.
We're going to digitally transform you from having a job to being on the dole. Yes.
It's
and
friendlier than automation.
You what?
It sounds friendlier than automation somehow.
Yeah, automation
which really does just mean...
Does sound like we're being taken over.
Maybe it doesn't. Yeah.
Being taken over by the machines.
Yeah.
But, and obviously you can't... I think there's someone, it might have even been Jeff Bezos or something like that, they said that you can't downsize to profitability or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what was built into that quote was, obviously you can in the short term. If you reduce overheads, you are going to increase your margin. But in the long term... you have to invest in your... that's just Pierre chucking his phone around.
Altice tried to do this, didn't it? The cable guys in France, they tried to... Because they basically have a history, I think, of going into companies and just basically cutting anything they possibly can. And it completely backfired in France, I think, at SFR, which is the French bit of Altice, when... they were basically losing business to everybody else in the market because they just cut back on all their sales and marketing expenditure.
Right.
So no one was going out and buying Altice stuff anymore.
Yeah,
and they've now had to kind of change the strategy around to some extent.
And that was in turn a bit of a sort of panicked overreaction to free mobile.
Yeah.
Which did the classic challenger thing of being sort of cheap and dirty.
Yeah.
And I remember I was at SA then, and the three incumbents were panicking a lot, and there was quite a lot of complaining, just trying to find some way of stopping them competing so hard.
Yeah,
the three incumbents felt some kind of entitlement.
Now the same thing's going on in Italy.
Yeah,
where they've gone. So,
which just reminds me actually one other little a sort of corporate top table thing that I covered. The chairman of Telecom Italia, a chap called Conti, I think. He cleared off. And it's interesting, I noticed that my take and Light Reading's take, which could have been Paul rather than you. So Vivendi, which had been poking its nose into Telecom Italia for ages, yet another French conglomerate getting funny ideas. What's wrong with them, Pierre? Been poking its nose, and then it got defeated by this activist investor group called Elliott.
Yeah.
And Elliott went and stuck all its people in the board. As you do, there's this sort of changing of the guard. It replaced a bunch of Vivendi nominees with Elliott nominees, including the chairman, Conti. And there was lots of wailing and gnashing of teeth from Vivendi, and they tried to get the institution shareholders to object, and they lost that. And then they finally sort of threw in the towel, going, oh, God, all right. And they're sort of going along with it in a sort of sulky, pouty, shoulder-shrugging sort of way. I can't resist. You won't be here for a while, mate. I've got to get a few digs in. And then Conti left. And I noticed that the Light Reading take on it was that Conti left amid sort of hassle from Vivendi, whereas my take was Conti's leaving precisely because Vivendi's kind of thrown in the towel and given up. I'm not saying either of us is right. It's just interesting how we had different takes on it. But if we go with my take, that seems to be the case. He was brought in to deal with them. He's dealt with them, so now he's off, as I put in my story, to spend more time with his yachts. So there we are. So what was our final thing? Yeah, we got to do that.
Huawei, Norway.
Oh yeah, so
Huawei
by far
Norway.
the most read story on Telecoms.com last week, which was almost entirely sort of populated by Jamie because I was off in California getting knackered and jet lagged. Was the headline was Norway says yes to Huawei, something like that. And the underlying story is that Norway's come out and gone, look, we're not going to put pressure on any of our operators
to ban anyone.
To stop any provider from being in the 5G network.
Yeah.
Which effectively is them saying yes to Huawei, given that certainly in the West, the political climate is basically everyone under pressure to say no to Huawei and to a less extent ZTE. Which I thought was an interesting one. What I took from that, I'll ask what you think first, Wei, because I know Ian's got some other thoughts on it. What I took from that was a sort of fracturing, or at least a sort of diluting of what prior to that we'd assume was a degree of consensus in sort of Anglophone, US-allied, Western European sort of countries, that they were going to play along, because the US has been putting so much pressure on everyone, basically saying, even if you don't believe us that they're a security threat, we think they are, and so we're not going to talk to you because they might be spying on us. So I thought that felt like a win for Huawei and a bit of a blow for the sort of US Trump pressure. What was your take on it?
Well, it's definitely a win for Huawei. I think it's very good news for them in such a climate. But I wouldn't say it's a big blow to Trump, because it's already got quite a few blows.
Right.
I mean, Germany used Huawei already. I think Italy is using them. If Germany is using them, then probably Austria will use them.
Switzerland.
Yeah. So
who from Germany's?
Deutsche Telekom uses Huawei.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I remember that now.
Yeah.
And then
I think Vodafone does as well.
Right.
I'm not 100%
Vodafone
on
at
that,
least
but they certainly use them in
the
most other
UK.
markets. Yeah.
And
that's right. And Merkel was always going, look, we're not going to get too involved in this one way or the other.
And I think the interesting thing about Germany as well is because you never really know whether the deals are core or radio. Yeah. Ericsson used to sort of show whether it had core or radio deals, didn't it, on that little map it put up, but Huawei's never done anything like that. But I think in Deutsche Telekom's case, they're there in the core network. So, and they're certainly there in the core network in... Have we switched off?
Yeah. No.
We're not? Okay.
Just much around doing...
They're certainly there in the core network in BT's case as well. I mean, BT hasn't this 5G core stuff. It's not sort of moved ahead with that at the moment, so it's using its 4G core, but Huawei's in that. They're being taken out, but for the time being, the communications are going over that. So they're already, if Huawei is using backdoors in its equipment, in its 5G equipment, to spy on, to help the Chinese government spy, they're already doing it. It's already a fait accompli
in quite a few
Pierre
countries. I just think I think this splintering analogy is correct. Because just at the beginning of the month, there was that agreement or MOU signed with Poland.
Yeah.
So it looks like the pendulum is swinging the other way, because Pence was there and they were pretty upbeat of shoring up the security, and Poland has been the most active, going for either NATO-wide resolution on it or a EU-wide resolution on it. So it's quite interesting on the NATO angle, because Norway was a founding member of NATO,
right,
and Poland only joined after the war fell down. So a new member was arguing that we should adopt a NATO unified stand against Huawei, and one of the founding members has already founded. So
the only, as far as I'm aware, the only restrictions that are there in Europe at the moment are the Polish stuff.
And the French.
The French have said themselves, I don't know if it's a government thing, presumably the government's raised concerns because Orange has said we're not going to use Huawei in our domestic market.
Yeah.
But I don't know any other operators that have come out and actually said in France we're not going to use Huawei.
I think Orange said that, but they only said it as we are not going to use Huawei in Europe.
Yeah.
So they're already using it in Africa.
And it sounds like a similar thing to what's happened in the UK, where a couple of the operators have taken a decision not to have it in the core. So, for instance... Well, I think it's most of them. I mean, I spoke to Three's Dave Dyson, who's the CEO, and he said it was actually a decision not to have it in the core. They've gone with Nokia, but they didn't want to have Huawei in the core. And BT's taking it out because of similar concerns, and Vodafone avoids having it in the core as well. So those operators all have sort of internal policies not to have Chinese equipment in the core network.
Well, and actually, getting back to the core and some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, isn't the real underlying concern of those people who are worried about it not so much the direct spying, but the fact that the 5G core is projected to be involved in so much stuff in future, autonomous cars, IoT, all kinds of crazy stuff, that it's more the security risk associated. You know, if it goes wrong in that compared to any previous generations of telecoms.
It's the clever bit of the network. And if it, like you say, if it links all these critical services and they're in the clever bit that does that, they could basically screw everything
Whereas
up.
previously it would have just been straight up spying, being able to listen in on confidential
or is more prone to hacking, for example. It's actually included in the report you wrote about last week. So the Danish consulting firm who published that report about
John Strand.
John Strand. He was talking about the swapping cost is not as high as GSMA predicted. But one of his argument was interesting. He said there are some sectors in the country that you just got to be extremely careful with security. For example, if you think dealing with China has no risks, why don't NATO buy fighter jet from China? So you will never buy fighter jets from China because you're concerned with security.
Well, they could just be rubbish, of course.
Well,
I've no idea. I don't know one way or the other.
That's a separate discussion. But
that could be another reason.
Yeah, then he said, well, communication is as critical as that. So you should not discount the security concern completely. So
I mean, if we do go to war with China in the next 10 years, and all this Huawei equipment is used to just completely cripple all of our comms infrastructure and factories and everything, everyone will go, bloody hell, what a stupid decision that was, wasn't it, to let Huawei into the networks?
Yeah, that's a good reason among many not to go to war with them. So, like, perhaps none of us know this, but let's say you're in a fighter jet, and they've all got some wireless comms. Does that go over a just totally closed military network? Presumably they're not just making calls on their phones.
It must do.
But to what
they
extent...
use different frequencies and everything.
They use satellites as well.
But maybe there's some concern that that's all going to end up going through this same Uber core at some stage. You know, maybe the extent of exposure, of security exposure, is so great that it might even affect all networks, public or private. I don't know.
It could do, yeah.
But you can see why people who have got greater insight into how this sort of stuff's run might be worried. But then the thing we never know, like with Trump, who's this sort of transactional, sort of hard-ass negotiator, we just don't know whether all of this is just complete bollocks and it's just yet another negotiating tool to get them to do better trade deals and stop currency manipulating.
It doesn't seem to be getting anywhere, does it, with that? It's just it just sort of goes from one thing to another and...
like a lot of politics these days.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to get your perspective on this way, but the Chinese seem to have been quite restrained in that whole... Because, I mean, someone pointed out, I can't remember who it was, but someone pointed out to me the other day, there's a lot China could do that it doesn't do to hurt the West. You know, it holds a huge amount of debt, for instance, and there's all sorts of things it could do to make things hard. And I think the comment the person who I can't remember made was that they seem to be playing a long game, and they can obviously do that because
definitely
she's going to be there for a lot longer than Trump is.
Yeah, but I'm not too sure that they got too many more tricks in their sleeves. It's basically everyone has got the cards on the table already, and it's just who can last longer. And apparently the Chinese president would be there for life.
Yeah.
So he's definitely playing a long game. So,
I mean, he certainly obviously faces pretty much no political pressure from his population in the way that a Western leader does. You know, even in although we're going, don't worry, I'll resist going off on a massive tangent, but we're going through a period in the West where democratic accountability is really sort of up for question and how it's going to be. But we still, even here, where we've got judges and parliament making all the rules, got more democratic accountability than I presume you have in China. So he doesn't have to worry about that. His political, I guess, where things could be delicate for him politically is among the sort of inner party, the upper echelons of the Communist Party.
Yeah, he has to manage the economy to a certain acceptable level.
But you'd have to screw up.
There is
no real bad.
Yeah, so there is no big sort of unrest.
Shock.
Yeah.
But going back to the Norway thing, you know, the implication was a few months ago that if you didn't kind of get rid of Huawei in your network and you didn't do what Trump and Pompeo were asking, there were going to be consequences. I think they were even going around Eastern Europe, sort of threatening not to provide, weapons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And now we've seen hardly any countries apart from Poland and a few operators actually do anything about this. Is there going to be are there going to be repercussions? Because if there aren't, everybody will go, well, they're just, it's just bluffing.
Well, maybe
it?
That's the thing you
and
do.
You made
with
the point
someone
about bluffing recently, I remember, didn't you? When you were talking about the whole trade, not being able to get access to US components.
Right.
When the extension was given.
And
there was no consequence. It just kept extending, and it's like unless they actually do something, then people will just say, "Well, they're all talk."
Well, Trump's bound to bluff. I've never read his book, but he's famous for his book, The Art of the Deal.
Yeah,
and I can imagine the essence of it, which is going, start the negotiation at a much higher level than you're willing to end up. Make it a win-win. Various other bits of best practice in negotiating. I'm sure there's lots of extra little Trumpy idiosyncrasies that he throws in there, but he seems to have a pretty feeble attention span, and I would have thought anyone's just got to go, okay, let him tweet, let him freak out, let him threaten us, and we'll just go, all right, we'll get back to you on that, and then just wait for a bit, and in a week's time maybe on to the next thing, or his own lot will be trying to get rid of him, and he'll be focused on that, or whatever. So there must be, from someone like Xi's point of view, who's done such a great job of making his position almost invulnerable. He must just look at this crazy stuff going on and going, look, just let him go mad.
Let him
It'll blow over. It'll blow over.
Maximum's another 4 years, and that's it. Yeah, I'll still be here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can see that from their point of view. But but like to finish off on the John Strand thing, I thought that was interesting, in so much as he, as an analyst, tends to adopt quite a contrarian position. Which is good.
Yep.
We're all in favour of that, as long as you can back it up, of course.
Yeah, which he does well, I think, in the report.
No point in just going, everyone's wrong except me.
Yeah.
And, he obviously thought that there was a GSMA report that said, keeping Huawei out of 5G networks is going to cost everything. And there are various extrapolations in it. And about half of that figure wasn't anything to do with the cost of building out the networks, but the sort of opportunity cost that came from a perceived 18-month delay.
Yeah.
And he sort of picked holes in that as well, and concluded it was quite small. Now, if we assume that there's some degree of confirmation bias in everyone, then his confirmation bias may be a little bit that we should be harder on Huawei, and the GSMA's maybe that we should be softer. The GSMA's is probably a more sort of globalist. Anything that gets in the way of our members making money as soon as possible, we'll view as a detrimental thing, whereas an analyst can take a slightly more sort of adversarial point of view.
Yeah.
But I mean, you wrote that thing up as well.
I did. Yeah.
Did you sort of? Did it make sense what he's?
Yeah.
saying?
I mean, I think I used it in a broader piece I wrote about, which was slightly sort of jokey tone about ways to minimise the cost of a Huawei swap out if you have to do it. And one of them was kind of John Strand's thing of actually just sort of taking a common sense look at things and saying, well, a lot of equipment needs replacing anyway.
Yeah,
so I think he was saying that the cost is actually quite high, but you're going to have to do that anyway.
A lot of it's just built in. There's no
escaping.
It's built in.
There's no escaping.
So his assumption is that you only need to replace out Huawei and ZTE, their equipment that you bought since 2016.
Yeah.
It's only the last few years.
Because prior to that, it's old and you're going to need to replace it.
You need to replace it anyway.
Yeah. And he used an interesting comparison. He said the leading 5G markets nowadays in the world are the US and South Korea. And there is no Huawei and no ZTE in the US. A very limited Huawei in Korea. It's the challenging operator is the LG U Plus is using Huawei. So there is no delay there, and they're not extremely expensive. And that's my interpretation. So in South Korea's case, so the two leading operators, SK Telecom and KT, they're not using the Chinese equipment, and they're doing quite fine. Yeah. So I think it's difficult to argue against those.
It is, and there's things that have happened that sort of back up his analysis. Yeah. So it's not the way that he would like it to have happened. But 3 in the UK is using Huawei as a 5G radio supplier, but they had Nokia in as a 3G supplier, and they had Samsung in as a 4G supplier. So And one of the issues is making sure that those networks interoperate. You have to have the 4G supplier and the 5G supplier the same company basically at first. And they're basically taking out all the Samsung equipment and putting Huawei equipment in instead. And it struck me that it sounded like a costly thing to do. So I asked Gabriel Brown, one of our analysts, about it, and he said, well, that equipment's quite old. It needed replacing anyway.
Right, so that concurs with
kind of concurs
John
with what
thing.
he's saying. You know, you'd have to kind of make these changes anyway.
Well, I think he's probably got a point. I think the broader issue for me is more the sort of balkanisation of it all. If we do get places like Korea, Western Europe, whatever, where there's none of this, and thus we've only got a choice of 2 vendors, let's say 3 if we throw Samsung in
Samsung,
then you get a degree of sort of balkanisation, which could have knock-on effects that are hard to imagine. Another illustration of that, and I'll just finish off there because I think we've done about an hour, unless you two have got anything else that you desperately want to say about this. I read a story, but I didn't cover it. I think it might have been while I was away, that Huawei has just launched a new, I think it was a 5G service or some kind of service comprised solely of Chinese components.
Right.
So they're already, to what extent this was set up just to go, we don't need you. But I read some story about them, and I'm pretty sure it must have been a networking thing rather than the handset thing, because I don't think they're at a stage where they could have a handset with nothing but Chinese components. But some bit of networking gear and some bit of relatively advanced networking gear that had nothing but Chinese components in it.
Oh, I didn't see that.
There you get. Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm worried now that you haven't seen it at all, that I'm just talking. But it definitely sort of caught my eye. But
well, that's what they've been trying to do. They've been insisting they can make do without US network components. It's just if you talk to them about it, they sort of say we'd rather be able to use US components because it's good to have a competition there and it's good to have the choice. But if we have to, we'll make do without.
Maybe it was because I think Ren did another. Maybe it was
one of his transcripts.
Yeah, it could have been something like that. And if they have done that and it's legit, then we got that balkanisation getting even more entrenched.
Yeah.
Which is probably, I could see it from Huawei's point of view, fair enough. And you'd think from a Western point of view, fair enough, then we don't need to worry about your gear. But there's bound to be some nasty consequences of segmenting the world in that way.
And possibility of more than one standard eventually taking shape.
Yeah.
Which, it wouldn't be a good thing. I mean, it was there with 3G, and to some extent it was there with 4G a little bit at first with this sort of TD, LTE.
Yeah, and then you could get like a sort of geopolitical like tech arms race.
Yeah.
What if one region was significantly ahead of the other in terms of things, and then it becomes a sort of security and a geopolitical thing.
Yeah.
So it's all
actually
good fun.
worse for security.
Yeah. And then we're back to square one.
Yeah.
On that happy note, thank you very much for joining us, and make sure you join us for the next one.